Hello, everyone, and welcome to this segment entitled The Pull of Tikkun Olam. Another way of maybe getting your head around this would be to say the pull of the spectacle, but Tikkun Olam is we'll call it Hebraic, Kabbalistic idea of repairing the world and using parts of what exists to pull it into this project of rebuilding and reframing reality as we understand it. And so it is a project working around us. It involves social engineering and all these kind of fun ideas. But we're joined by our guest from Scotland, Aidan. And if you remember him from our last video, we talked about symbolism and how sometimes the type and the symbol can be misplaced or presented to us in a very, well, we'll just call it a sneaky way that we can be kind of deceived into thinking a thing is something that it is not. And we're going to do a breakdown of how that's taking place in our world today with the likes of people you're probably familiar with, um, Ben Shapiro and his cast there at the Daily Wire, people like Jordan Peterson, and he's part of an association called the ARC. And the ARC is basically trying to shift reality around these very ideas that we're talking about, kind of shifting words and symbols that you know from Christianity and sort of recontextualizing them and sort of slowly shifting the range of our perception and ultimately how we view reality. And so Aidan's kind of picked up on subtle ways this is going on in our discourse. Other characters he's going to focus on are the brothers Pajot, and we're going to break down a little bit of what they're up to and see sort of the subtle little tricks that they're using, whether they're intentional or not. A lot of times, I think a general audience out there takes them in there. These are hugely popular people. And I think it's helpful to kind of discern sort of the subtle shifting that we said in the last video, how they're subtly shifting the ground of being or God's order of being and sort of transmogrifying that into kind of a new, uh, I'd say, order of reality. I don't know if I mangled that up too much, Aidan, but where would you like to begin with this segment called what did we call it? The Pull of Tikkun Olam?
Well, you'd suggested Tikkun Olam, and I'd suggested Spectacle. Tikkun Olam is a great. I think it's a better choice because it's actually that God exploded, and that's where creation comes from. Is God exploding, and so it's repairing the face of God. It's putting all the pieces, and when all the pieces are put back together, then you'll see the face of God. So that's the Kabbalistic endpoint. Singularity, which we were talking about previously. So yeah, I begin by saying I was very influenced by. I was quite influenced by Jordan Peterson in the early stages. Yeah, sorry. I don't think I'm not in a minority. It was the C-16 Canada bill thing, and here was this guy speaking really forcefully about free speech and what consequences this would have. And yeah, so I watched a few. I did watch all of his Genesis lectures. I watched a bunch of stuff. So yeah, really from his early rise into public prominence, and then because I was watching him, I watched an interview with this guy, Jonathan Pajot. And I have to say, I really liked Jonathan Pajot and still think him to be a good character. He's Eastern Orthodox. He's an icon carver, or he was. I don't think he carves icons anymore, or very intermittently. He's gone kind of full time into being a symbolist and analyzing. His analysis, I think, is great. Movies, really anything that's happening. One of his catchphrases is symbolism happens, and he has a large growing website called The Symbolic World, where he analyzes all kinds of things, narratives, and at the moment it's fairy tales. he's sort of moved into, and fairy tales are unthreatening. Jonathan is very will put things in a very, I guess, general way about what is going on. So he acknowledges that there is something major going on, and that it's not good, and it's not going to a good place. He's coming from, I guess, the Eastern Orthodox perspective, and there's many people who are Orthodox who can see what's happening in the world, and that it's not good. So I think he shares that perspective. He got a lot of. He would credit his brother Matthew with being the kind of genius who broke the ground on the symbolic thinking. That's kind of what he was doing, getting into intuitively. So his brother is a mystic, is a deep, subtle thinker who's on this other project. So he's the one we'll look at second. He's a recluse, really lives. I think he's been effectively off grid, as far as I can tell, living in the woods, and he's wanted to live like as close to. I think he studied mathematics and was quite. His tendency to be highly abstract, wanted to be as concrete as he could, because he was looking for the symbolism in reality, in the concrete, real world, the natural world. Let's say that's how I would see it, which is also interesting from our previous conversation about transcendent and immanent frames. He's searching for the symbolic unfolding within the immanent frame, I guess, within the very much the material, rather than in the in-between. Jonathan Pajot is very close friends with Jordan Peterson, who you were mentioning, and I always thought that was a bit unfortunate. Peterson's fall. He became addicted to benzodiazepine medication, and really had a terrible near-death thing. Nearly lost his mind. Nearly lost his life. It was catastrophic for him, and I think he's still recovering. I don't know if he'll ever be fully recovered from it. It's hard to tell. He's obviously come a long way in recovery, but is not the kind of person he was prior to the benzo crash, because he cut cold turkey. He came off them cold turkey. And interestingly, that was his PhD, was in addictions, and it's one of those things where his specialism came to bite him, that he did something that he should never have done, which was stop cold turkey, because the consequences with those drugs were catastrophic. So anyway, I don't know how much to say about these characters, but Jordan Peterson now is employed by the Daily Wire. He was previously kind of just getting into trouble as a Canadian professor of psychology, and now he did get into trouble with them, and now he's a full-time employee, I think well remunerated with the Daily Wire, and his output has been let's say patchy. I hardly follow. Sometimes he's interviewed someone and I've watched at least part of it, but yeah, I think his tweet on October the 7th, "Give him hell, Netanyahu," is one that will follow him. He was asked to explain what he meant, or should he retract it, and he went into a highly academic thing about tweets and the meaning of tweets and depth of attention and analysis. And he didn't say it was a foolish thing to say, given the slaughter that we're now seeing. He's never retracted at all, and I don't think he's going to. There's a picture of him, Ben Shapiro, and Benjamin Netanyahu having a nice dinner and shaking hands, and that was, he's very close to that. So I wondered how that would compromise Jonathan and Jonathan's work. And in this video, this interview that's this week, I think, it is The Dark Side of Fairy Tales with Ben Shapiro. It's not that what Jonathan says is in any way egregious. I think everything he says is absolutely fine. It's really what he doesn't say.
Yeah. Before we show any clips, there are people that have kind of tracked the ARC network or the Wire network, and they go back to, all the kind of techno elites that are also putting together, the digital convergence, and that fund both of the political parties in this country, and I'm sure over where you live. So there's the tangled webs we weave, and you can't ignore these networks. So they both they're there to create the platforms, and at the very minimum, uh, give you the parameters of where you can go with the discourse at the very least. But yes, there are these networks, these promotion networks that are tied to these other projects. And I can just say briefly about Jordan Peterson. I'll just say honestly, I can't stand the guy, never have, but okay. So not to be judgy, but there you go. And his whole work on symbolism and his recreation of psychobabble and the Bible, and then everybody that presses on him, like, do you think Christ is divine? And he becomes like Bill Clinton, like, it depends on what the meaning of is, it's
Yeah.
like, you're just such a phony baloney, and you're propped up with your, anyway, you go to the ARC page and all these millions of papers, and just trust me, he's so smart, small, just go back to recent times with any of these characters where they write about COVID. Oops, can I? Oh, yeah, I think we're on YouTube. I mean, and like, so, and you can ask him now, like, well, what this is what you said. We have this, like you said, that basically you were in line, that all the comedians that were paid off, all the television media heads, go out there, and you're a loser if you're not with the program, and you said it. So what do you say about that? And then it's always this squeaky, swarmy, anyway. So not to kind of, I really wanted to. This is Aidan's show, and it's supposed to be a little bit heady, and we're breaking down symbolism. So I don't want to sit there and get an emotional tone. So I shouldn't have said that. I was trying not to say that.
No, I'll join in.
Yeah, we're about to put Ben Shapiro on the inside. I told myself, like don't just be reserved. Don't say anything about Benny. When
I would like to join. I like to join in there and say it's exactly right what you're saying. When I said about paying attention, I had a list of 30 major objections in his thinking. They were like catastrophic, even in terms of his symbolic thinking of.
He's selling a Gnostic Christ to the general audience.
He really is weaving an evolutionary narrative that goes back to lobsters, and there's all of these sort of jokes around it. But before, it's the idea of this thing being built into life, and the competitive, what he called the dominance hierarchy, and things, myths battling out with each other, and people battling out and getting on top, and really by that, one, you can't get the metaphysical from the natural. There's no point at which the evolutionary trajectory, it suddenly pops in. It's either there from the beginning or it's never there, and of course it's there. And the other is that rather than Christ being at the top of the hierarchy, as he kind of installs at the top of this hierarchy, it would be Genghis Khan as the kind of guy who demonstrates the optimum evolutionary strategy of behavior for maximum, because Genghis Khan's offspring, he's got more, his imprint shows up in more people than any other single individual by a huge margin. So that guy following the evolutionary strategies would be at the top of the pyramid. It would be a Genghis Khan approach. He would follow the logic of Peterson's thinking on that, and there's tons more that I could say. And the other one is he was a collector of Soviet art, and a student of totalitarianism. That was a major theme in a lot of his work, and the rise of totalitarian societies, and that was his big fear about the woke and everything. It was going to be this totalitarian movement that would lead to gulags. And then when the actual thing, the real deal, actually shows up at everyone's door and locks everyone in their homes and demonstrates his power by forcing everyone into behaviors that were, let's say, not normal, and then the experimental procedures and all the rest of it. He said his first thing was get the damn blank. If you roll up your sleeve and they put it into your arm,
right.
He said get the damn that thing. I don't know what you can say on your channel on YouTube or not, but
Yeah,
And
I'm not big on symbolism. I'm kind of a slowpoke with some of that stuff. Typology, for some reason, God graced me with that. But you can just see like the Jangus kind of character there, the two-faced, the two he's telling you. I believe this is simplistic. It's more complicated than that. But the vacuum that's going to be created, because a lot of people around the world are going to hear what Carl Schwab, Field Marshal Schwab there, and Yuval Harari, and you'll eat bugs and you'll own nothing and be happy. And in one large sense, they're there to fill the gap. So, that's what they do at The Wire. They take all they're not even low hanging fruit. That's the frickin' stuff on the ground that they hang up, the woke stuff that's so easy to go after. And if you actually take that back, like who's funding this and who's funding that, and talk about networks, then they're going to call you the crazy guy, because we all know where that goes. So I believe, I think it's been a couple of years, but Amazing Polly kind of did good with the graphs of who's funding this and who's saying. So when we talk about Jordan Peterson and the ARC, there's going to be an interconnection with all of these people. And whether he does this or not, I think he takes people that have a hunger for the truths of Christianity. Some people are maybe young and atheistic, and starts out with these profound ideas like clean up your room. And he kind of says, wow, somebody's actually, and he's pulling them over. He's using that symbolism, and he's selling a Gnostic Christ. It's the foundational truth is that we're in a fallen state, that you're separated by God through your sin, and you have to work through that. And Gnostics would rather focus on the world is broken. Let's just start with some Jungian mumbo jumbo to fill the void, and like you're kind of it's like some French intellectual that's doing this and never letting you release, and you're just kind of trapped in there, his little loop. And then you got Benny sitting there talking about with certitude some idea of some type of morality, and next thing you know, you're corralled by the mimetic popularity of this into a new frame of reality. But I don't want to be, these are just reactions. I haven't even looked at the slides you're going to present.
I think these things have a life of their own, and I think I was saying that in our previous conversation, that people end up in the grip of them, and I do see Peterson as having been very much someone in the grip of something and being pulled along by it, being dragged, kind of amazing to watch initially, but anyway.
Do you want to start? Do you want to do Benny yet, or do you want to introduce a little bit more?
This I don't know if I need to say any more. What I would say is that since Peterson's health issue, let's say, and in his recovery, he was friendly with Jonathan, but then he kind of really turned to Jonathan, and I think got a lot of like consolation and advice, and it has then been highly influenced by Jonathan. And I don't think that Jonathan's symbolic thinking is pernicious. Jonathan Peugeot, he does a remarkable job of frequently tying to, it is Eastern Orthodox Christianity. They don't have the fullness of the faith, but nevertheless, he does do quite a remarkable, and I have to say, I don't see him as a bad actor. I see him as compromised by his friendship with.
Let me ask you about this, Aidan, before we get into this, because I think some people are overly cynical, and one of the cynical things I'd say, well, maybe he got close to him because Peugeot is a little bit more sincere about his Christian worldview. So it gives Jordanstein a little bit more street cred. And, there's this idea in the world that, you're going to see these thumbnails. Why are so many celebrities becoming religious? And, is all this real? And people that have critiqued this have said if you truly had a conversion, would you still be just selling, just trading in the same products and the same adverts and running in the same circles of friends and doing essentially the same thing, except maybe popping up across now and again? And I think that's a fair criticism. I mean, if it's a really thorough conversion, wouldn't you want to just really change your life. Which, and I'm just putting it out there. So when we talk about what they're doing, it could be part of this bigger project where people are trying to set, this kind of Albert Pike, we're going to create the nihilists and then we're going to pull them back into this pseudo belief system. And that does seem, as these wars and rumors of wars are taking place, it does seem to be like part of a social engineering psyop to some extent. I'm just saying it does appear that way to some extent.
Yeah, I guess I've said out in our conversations that I don't see the world and what's happening as being primarily in human hands. I see it as being
absolutely
the primary or spiritual forces. And so if you think of how difficult it was, I can think of times there's approaching conversion to being a Catholic. And various other, like if you think of an issue that you don't want to look into because you know the information is going to be, it's going to change everything, you have to cross a certain threshold when you do that. And then everything has to change because now you know that thing. You've now got that information. You can't deny it anymore. But plenty of people don't want to go up to see that. They don't want to know that thing because, like, if they take that on board about a lot of the things we've been talking about, they won't be able to live in the same way, and they want to live in the same way. They don't want the pain, and so it's kind of understandable in a way that you've said it many times, that if you allow the lie to pass, a demonic ontology, you're pulled into something that wasn't there before but is now there because you allowed that to pass. You don't get away with just ignoring it. There's a time when you didn't know, you were blissfully ignorant. Then there's a time when there's something on the edge of your awareness and you could look at it, and then you have a sense, okay, it's that. Now I have a sense of what it is, and then there's a choice whether you look or don't look. And that's And so
sorry, go ahead. I didn't let you finish. Go ahead.
I was going to say is that I think that a lot of what we see in the world is not this wolf in sheep's clothing. A lot of these organizations, a lot of the people, really everything, the world runs this way, that people have chosen. They've chosen not to look and not to know what's true. They've chosen to turn a blind eye to a lie, or let it pass for the sake of it's an easier, it's compromise, and now they're pulled along, and they're being pulled along by something which is not actually human. It's not them, because they're being pulled along by it. They're in a sense, with the egregore, you feel you are you're driving it, but it's also driving you. It's that
and that's the pernicious part about biopolitics, because it controls us within. I do think there's our agents that kind of nudge the algorithms to nudge us in certain directions. So I think that there is a little bit of prodding and poking, but ultimately it is spiritual.
I think there really are. There are people who are that. Those are the what I would class as the real wolves in sheep's clothing, who are conscious agents, who are planting symbols, trying to manipulate things and capture people. And I mean, that to me, that's underhand. But there are lots of other people who are, if you were to look at their motivation, you would find them to be well motivated. You would find them to be, they would check their own conscience and find nothing to reproach themselves with, because they're in the grip of this non-human thing, and they don't.
I think that speaks to what we're going to see. I think in my opinion, I think we see one person here that's, I mean, he's a living agent, and the other one, I think.
The other one is not. The other one is doing what I'm describing, which
has become a useful idiot for
allowing something to pass. I think what Jonathan is doing here is allowing, in both cases, both clips from this, he allows something to pass which he knows he knows.
It's a lie of omission.
So it's that omission, and you may, I don't know if you can see in the first one. I think you can really see it in his body language in the second. It's you could say these are minor occasions. Like this appears to be minor, because what does it matter? It's politeness. It's Shapiro's show. He's He's helping the Daily Wire. He sits on he's part of an Exodus discussion circle. So it makes sense to not say, actually, it's this way. And the consequences of saying it are quite big because they're symbolic, of just giving basic Christian, including Orthodox, basic Christian understanding of the typology of what Ben says. But letting it pass now has the effect of exactly what it's like, catching a moment where, I mean, maybe these moments have already happened and it's led him here. They must have, actually, to being on Ben Shapiro's show and taking part in an interview. But it means that you have failed to break something that should have been broken, and because it's allowed to pass, it's like letting a spirit pass. And although it's minor, it's just very illustrative.
No, I think, okay, just to set up, I had never seen these. I don't watch Ben Shapiro, maybe like if it's on a Twitter or something for a moment. So I believe, not to set the bar too up, I think that Aidan's got a brilliant take on what he's going to reveal, these tiny things that are actually hugely significant. So I don't want to get it too hyped up. So some of this is still, I wanted some of this to be fresh to my eyes. So I think what he's able to discern, Aidan here, is, we'll see where it goes, but I think this is going to be interesting. So the first story is Peugeot and Ben Shapiro. I'm assuming it's part of his wiring program, or wire, or whatever he calls it over there. And they're talking about fictions and Jack and the Beanstalk. So the opening of the show, he's talking about the significance of fairy tales, and then Ben Shapiro wants to talk about the morality, and it's just this idea, they're pushing this kind of Judeo-Christian meme that we both love morality, and this undergirding assumption that we both believe in the same 10 commandments and the same God. And so there's this undergirding of assumption that go into what they're about to discuss. Do you want me to break down to the first one where we're getting into Cain and Abel?
Cain and Abel, yeah.
And bear in mind, this is a big part. Okay, I want to try to back off and not talk, piss people off or something, but it's so crucial to understand what's going on in the world today, that there are these typologies, the older brother and the younger brother, but it's always been understood as one of enmity. Sort of the Vatican II dialogue wants to transmodify that into a brother, like how we would say it. And that's not how Scripture has us understand that. So I think you picking up on the Cain and Abel, but let's get into it. So this is I believe the location that you had it. It's called the dark side of fairy tales. So we're going in here, not at all at the beginning. So not much of a setup. It's 28 minutes and 41 seconds.
That you're not at the top of the hierarchy. That is a deep human impulse, and it's a destructive human impulse that goes all the way back to Cain and Abel, which is really the story of a figure who is, for a reason he can't discern, rejected by God. He brings a sacrifice, actually his idea to bring sacrifices, and then Abel brings the sacrifice, and Abel's sacrifice is then taken by God. And God specifically designs this as a test of Cain. It's hard to read the text without coming to the conclusion that God is doing this specifically in order to test Cain, because he then has this incredible exchange with Cain, the first time in human history that God is explicitly testing someone in advance of the thing happening, right? Where he says, the sin crouches at your door because God knows what's going to happen, but you can master it, right? Which he's basically saying, like, figure out what Abel did right instead of trying to destroy Abel, and Cain can't handle it, and he goes and he kills Abel. That is the story of humanity in a nutshell, and it feels like we've built a society of Cains. And so anybody who's considered a builder has to be immediately struck down. By the way, I don't think it's a coincidence that at the end of the story, Cain actually repents. Cain repents, and then he becomes a city builder.
Yeah. I think the stories in Genesis are definitely, I think, some of the most powerful stories that.
Do I go a little bit further?
No, that's it, because he doesn't correct him. He doesn't say, well, Cain didn't repent. Cain was full of self-pity, but there was no repentance at the end of the story. And that wasn't the end of Cain's story. That was really just the beginning. So Jonathan doesn't say, about the mark of Cain. He doesn't say about the he'll be condemned to be a fugitive and to wander. And the mark would obviously was meant to stop anyone from who wanted vengeance on Cain from taking it. The mark of Cain was a protection from God, but it also sealed him into the curse. So the curse, he's cursed. The land is cursed where Abel's blood falls. So
Cain saying,
okay,
his blood be upon us. We have no God but Caesar. Marked them. But they will get a protection, and they will get powers from the principalities of this earth. But yeah, not to, so like you say, if you got into not the symbolism as he's defining the void, but the typology, Cain and Abel, Esau and Jacob, and he's not making those connections. Instead, he's blurring those connections.
And he's certainly not going to say, he's not going to draw, and you wouldn't really expect him to draw the connection, but you would expect him to say, he didn't repent. He was full of self-pity. He was marked by the curse. He had to wander the earth. He had no place, really. He was a fugitive.
And so who does that fit? Yeah, who does that fit? No, he had the agriculture, and he said, this is something I cannot bear. And he became a roamer and a city dweller. And in our modern thing, that's supposed to be, oh, that's progress, that's good. But you don't see, no, that's the type. You know, it goes back to the offering that wasn't from the heart. It was from the natural lens of reality. We would say the offering came, because it's kind of confusing. Like, why he did give him an offering, so why did God kind of come down on him? And he didn't repent. He didn't have self-reflection. He wasn't capable of it, apparently.
Yeah, no, that's precisely it. It's precisely it. I mean, you do get a feeling that what Shapiro is saying, that he knows the symbolism that he's saying about God testing Cain, you know.
And what does he mean by we're all Cains now? What is that? What do you think he's doing there? Is that what he said? Did I hear that right?
I think so. Yeah. A world of Cains, city builders, but the builder has to be struck down, but we're all Cains now. I think that is what he says. But yeah, which is kind of with the next clip. Is even more visible, actually, the distribution of the idea of guilt or of anything being cursed, the equal distribution among all. And so, I mean, I really wouldn't expect Jonathan to go, no, hang on a minute, Ben, actually, the Christian typology of Cain and Abel is of the older brother and the younger brother.
Well, I can see why. If someone pulled you in and you were honestly doing art and typology and symbolism, and you became an Eastern Orthodox Christian, and next thing you know, that's the whole thing. That's the pull of the spectacle. Now you're on the paycheck. You're getting all the good YouTube algorithms and the platforms, and you're building it. And a lot of his ideas are very good, but he's getting the conferences and the meetings. The next thing you know, Benny is buttering your, he's the wire's buttering your bread. Like Candace, she got a big paycheck, they said, right? You know?
Yeah.
And now you're part of it. And so when somebody just tells you something like,
he won't miss it. But the thing is,
that's not a Christian understanding of it. You just let that go. It's huge.
That's what I mean. Jonathan's understanding of biblical symbolism goes down to like the minutiae. It goes down to the most obscure stories. And you know, he has a whole, that's his bread and butter. That is already his bread and butter. Whether Shapiro, you know, puts more butter, he's already immersed in that. So there's no way that he missed Cain repented, you know, end of story. That typologically, that has a meaning of its own. You know, to say Cain repented, it was fine. You know, he started building cities. But Jonathan would not miss that. That would have just shouted at him. He would have seen it. So I find that
I talk about in Kabbalah. I don't want to be this crass kind of self-promoter here, but in the conclusion, one of this themes, like in Kabbalah, usually had to like be in rabbinic studies for 30 years, and it was very arcane and very, very fringe. But in the modern world, there's Kabbalah for the masses. So that's been in our culture, in pop psychology, in self-help, in the Oprah phenomenon and her book list, in Netflix. It's there. And they're kind of softening us up because they literally say the project is Kabbalah for the masses. Like they literally want the Gentiles to understand rudimentary Kabbalah. And part of it is this different shifting and a different understanding of sin and redemption. And it's that slow shifting. And part of it is this soft stuff. And, we're all good people. And this, as Bishop Barron would say, slushy kind of talk. And so I see that going on. I see an agenda kind of going on. I can't help myself, but literally that is what they're saying. They want to introduce through popular culture Kabbalah to the masses. So hitting that intellectual mode is, I think, what's taking place here. And what's significant is this is foundational to an understanding of Christian redemption, the story of which all other aspects of Christianity are built on understanding the fall and the foundation of redemption. So he just shifted that over. And so by Peugeot just kind of letting it go, it's humongous in my mind.
It is in the Christian story, typologically, Cain is the synagogue, and Abel is Christ. So Abel is a type of Christ, whereas the Jews are a type of Cain.
Well, yeah, Jacob and Esau. Jesus is Esau. That's why Jesus is Jacob, and the Pharisees are Esau. And that's why it's funny, because they have inverted that, and that's what they want to destroy Rome or America or Christianity, calling it Esau. They've switched that around. But I'm getting, I think, off base a little bit, and I want to keep us tuned in. Sorry about that, everybody. Let's pull this back up. And what are we about to hear here, Aidan?
This is about conspiracy theories or conspiracy theorists. And it is back to the question of the Jews again. And here, I think Jonathan's body language is very telling, because he's I would say, invariably very open and engaging, and it shows in his physical demeanor. And here, when the camera cuts to him after Ben is finished saying what he says, Peugeot's arms are folded like this, and he says, "You're absolutely right." But of course, he knows he's not absolutely right. That's not the story. That is not.
It's so sad seeing people compromise, especially a pearl of great price, like the wisdom of the fundamental truths of Christianity, to see somebody doing that on camera. But let's watch it. I have seen it once before, but I want to really pay attention this time.
And so the basic idea of, the satanic impulse, the sort of, I ought to be in control, you ought to be in control, our morality supplants for God. I mean, maybe one way to fight the sort of conspiracism is to say that there is a part of us that is all lizard people, right? I mean, it's not as though there is a genetic cadre of human beings who are more likely to be the lizards. It's not as though there's elites who are gathering together and then they decide, okay, it's time to strip off our skins, and underneath is the satanic lizard. It's more like that's always been a part of humanity, that there's a part of all of us. I mean, it's sort of like the argument that's been made historically with regard to, for example, the death of Jesus, right? Anti-Semites historically have suggested, well, the Jews bear the guilt of the death of Jesus down to today because it was the Jews who killed Jesus. Whereas the explanation that I've been given by my Christian friends, at least, is yes, the Jews were involved of the time in the killing of Jesus, as were the Romans, as were everyone, meaning that the idea is that everyone was involved in the killing of Jesus, which is why supposedly, according to Christian theology, his blood washes everybody clean, is that the entire story is one of the guilt of humanity washed away by Christ's death.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. But it's also good. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And this is the thing about corruption, is that, it's like someone who complains about the evil elites and how in what they're doing, and that doesn't pay their taxes, right? Or cheats on their taxes, or does whatever. It's like corruption happens at every single level, right? And we justify our corruption. People who don't, we have it here. Like a construction worker come to my house, he'll always ask me, "Do you want a receipt or don't you want a receipt?" And it's like corruption is endemic at every level. So that's definitely something we have to understand. But I think it's good to recognize, for example, COVID was a good example. We don't have to believe in absolute top-down control to notice that evil things are happening, right? All you need is motivation. You just need a
I'm just checking in. Is he, because he's going to say we all have this reptilian Jungian thing in our mind, or am I just projecting on him?
No, he's kind of just saying how
Do you want me to go on a little bit more?
I mean,
Is there a
you-
little bit more? Okay, let's give
yeah,
it
you
another
can
minute.
just hear what he-
Okay.
aligned motivation for things to manifest themselves the way they happen in COVID. So it's not like the people at the top are like, we're going to just tell everybody what to do and to close the hospitals and everything. But if you give incentive for people to act, they will act they will act together with that incentive. And so I also don't tend to believe in absolute top-down conspiracies, but I do think that there are people that believe that we should move towards, let's say, something like a world government. I don't know exactly how to phrase it, or more internationalist vision. And that even though they didn't plan, I don't think anybody planned COVID happened or whatever, but then it was an opportunity to put into place certain things that they already wanted to put into place. And so I really do believe that, because,
Okay.
you can sort of see where he's coming from on the, it's diffuse enough to not point the finger at anybody. COVID happened and so on. There are people, there is a top down, and there is this general movement towards one world government and so forth. So there are people, but there's no, and he that's why I think he's well motivated, but he's not going to go there. He's not going to cross the threshold, certainly, and go and try and look and see, hang on, what's really going on here. He's going to do his thing, which is a good thing in its own way. It's like hard to say that what Jonathan is doing is not good. It's like lovely. The fairy stories are lovely, but they're not threatening. They won't threaten anyone's livelihood. They won't give you a bad name. It's going to be fine. If you stick with the fairy stories, and if you interpret the Bible in the similar sort of way, which is kind of what he does.
First of all, this is not how Christianity is actually built on the assumption that the synagogue accused him of, as a typology, as it's a deicide, and that's how it's always been understood. And that was actually foundational for understanding the enmity between the two seeds that built Christian civilization. And I even cited it. I did it by accident, but I think it's solid. When St. Stephen said, "You killed him," to the synagogue, they stoned him, and he had the beatific vision. And I believe that was the opening of the beatific vision, unless someone wants to question that. And so that's what built Christian civilization. And I believe this is the omission here is what's going to just leave the pieces, hand the misplaced pieces over to somebody. But yeah, so when he said that, well, this is my understanding of Christian civilization, it's all of it's, yeah, you can say that as part of it, but you know what, typologically, you'll be on another train. So it's very disingenuous, and Shapiro knew what he was doing. And yeah, the body language of Peugeot and shifting this, and I can't help it but being sort of judgmental. I sort of see if people had a diet of watching all these Zio programs where you're not looking at the reality of the death and the genocide abroad, but instead blaming the victims and coming over here and just burying yourself in every other amusement within the spectacle, that you would watch Ben Shapiro or people that are propped up like the Jordan Petersons and this Peugeot guy that can say, I don't really think it works like this. Hey, let's talk about facts. Follow the frickin' money and talk to me then, instead of, yeah, like this. I don't think it exactly. Well, really? So what do you do when someone presents you with these networks of power? They don't like that. That's why when you present with the actual networks of who's funding whom, they put you off there. You got your free speech, but you're out of reach, so that these people can come up. I don't really think accidents happen. Everything happens by accident. Then people that might have had a plan. So COVID just happened. Everything, banks just, they collapse. The economy can just collapse. Wars just start. And that accidental reality paradigm that you're just shoved with all the time. So when you're presented as this guy being the master of symbolism, and just breaking your ability to actually trace forensically, using logic, using the scientific method, things that are observable, things that are measurable, things that are repeatable. They want to break that chain because you simply just say you can't talk about it. Case in point, Trent Horn this week saying things that you can't talk about, these narratives that you can't discuss. That's why go over and watch what E. Michael Jones just said. He's going to get back. Let's look at the science, Trent. Let's look at what you're talking about. And let's look at what you're not talking about, Trent. Let's look at all these kind of things that you are denying you're not talking about, until I think we can challenge this and pull ourselves away. I'm sorry, this is your show.
No, no,
It gets me so worked up seeing these.
I understand. I'm probably more. I have a genuine sort of affection across, through the screen for Jonathan. Just for, I genuinely don't believe he's in any way badly motivated. But I see the consequences of this move. I guess that's why I wanted to draw the attention to it, because I wondered if something like this would happen if he would be put in this position, and really to have something so fundamental put to him, which Shapiro basically ends by saying the Jews did everybody a favor effectively by killing Christ or by demanding that Christ be killed, because look at the result. Everyone's guilt was washed away. It's typologically false. That's not what happened. It wasn't that the guilt of all humanity was washed away when
you're the smartest guy in the room. You can go down to the minutiae and talk about every symbolism in the Old and New Testament, but you can't give him pushback at that moment when Christ demanded you to speak truth to power.
That was the moment. To me, much more egregious than the first one, which is, it shows, it's like there was the correction needed to be made, but okay, you didn't make it. But this one is just massive, because he's effectively it's a cleansing. It's a cleansing. We're washed clean too,
And then you don't have to look at all the facts that, there's, just like all these other events, there's a parallel event, there's a preparation, the event 2020 that prepared, and you can go on and on demonstrating that this thing was orchestrated from A to Z.
Oh yeah, he's not going anywhere near any of that. But the thing is that with this, we were all washed. We were all washed in Christ's blood. The consequence of that is this thing that you heard in both cases is everyone's a lizard underneath. Really, everyone.
We're all lizards. We're all Cain. We're all lizards.
Everyone's Cain. Everyone's corrupt. Everyone's a lizard. That's the consequence of collapsing what is an absolutely crystal clear, that the typology is the teaching. Is the content of it's why it's so upsetting to have the typological reading of the Old Testament and to see Christ there, to see Christ being killed by again and again, or show up again and again.
And I'll give you a charitable take on Peugeot, that he learned these things because they were his passion, and he believed, and that he wanted to tell the world, and he had his channel. I suppose, that's maybe how Justin Bieber, if I understand his story, before Diddy got him to his freak out parties, he grabbed him off. Here's a cute kid. Here's some guy that's really attracting people with the power of symbols, and you pull them in, and you're attached to that beast system. And every time you go up, another devil, another level, another devil. And next thing you know, somebody's challenging the fundamental in your face, when you've built everything on discerning these symbols and being able to put it out to maybe bring people into this truth. And next thing you know, you find yourself denying Christ publicly. It's kind of a shame.
It is that. It's a denial of Christ. And Jonathan will keep going, and he'll keep doing his analysis and all the rest of it. But you can just kind of see, I guess, the lack of clarity, the keeping it fuzzy. He's not going to turn the floodlights on and say, here it all is. Here it all is. It's not going to do that. Now, I don't know. That's on him, but it's the move. It's the move that he's made. So I understand your kind of deep irritation.
No, I don't. Yeah.
I do. I understand.
I do. I've seen Peugeot before, because I saw him speaking to, Wolfgang Smith, and Wolfgang has, some strange perennial ideas too. But, there's some interesting ideas there, and symbolism can be fun. But, instead of just concrete foundational truths of the Christian faith, no, let's go over to Wacky World and talk about this and that, and you do the shell game at those precise moments. It's like you're I'm sorry, I'm.
And I don't think he's badly motivated. I think what he's doing is sensing one of those thresholds that I'm talking about, not crossing, not actually stepping across into.
I know. You get yourself in that situation, and then what are you going to do? And like, look, I don't at this moment want to talk about Candace, but whatever happened there, you do know when you cross them at the Daily Wire that all hell is going to come upon you, and not everybody has the skin to deal with that. So, you're in that position, and what are you supposed to say? No, Ben, you got this backwards at that moment,
Yeah, you don't want to get too close. So I could say, there was a thing I wouldn't mind saying about Peterson actually, and just another little point about the Peterson's teaching, or do you want to go into Matthew?
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Yeah, there's a thing Peterson was quite would always bring up in certainly the early days. I don't think he does it so much now, which was the traits, the big five as they're called. The ocean is the mnemonic for remembering it, is openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And so these are like universal. They did these amazing cross-cultural studies of like all different kinds of people, and they found these are kind of universal traits, but everyone kind of scales differently on them. And so there's a big thing, and I think Peterson was getting people to analyze their own extent of how open they were or how agreeable, and they all have different meanings. And I come out as high in agreeableness. I probably, but there's a so I don't get a kick from saying anything, criticizing people, but there's a missing trait, and genuinely a missing trait in the big five. One of the original researchers went back to the data with, I think, another researcher. For whatever reason, they trawled through all the data and they found there was a trait that had been missed, even though he was part of all. And that was, they call it, there's a great little book. It repeats itself, but it's just brilliant to know. It's called the H factor of personality. And the H stood for honesty and or humility. So it's the like willingness to speak the truth in difficult circumstances and all the rest of it. And also the humility to know, not a false humility, but to know when you're at the limit of your understanding and not to say something that you don't know, or, that kind of thing, to be going away out. And so that little book shows this correlates. Trait, you want to be high. If you're going to marry someone, you want them to be high in the H factor. You don't want someone who's willing to just tell you lies. And likewise, if you're going to go into business with them and all the rest of it. And it's just so interesting. Peterson's thing was always, it was a major thing about the Logos and speak the truth. And that's actually where Jonathan Pageau and Peterson bonded, was over this idea of the Logos, which is EMJ has made a big, a lot about the Logos rising and this idea of the Logos. And what's interesting about that is from what I was talking in our previous conversation, it's the pre-incarnate Greek philosophical height. So it's high philosophically, but it's not Christ incarnate. He's not only the Logos when he's Jesus, and so a lot of people who are drawn to the kind of deist position would rather hold to a Logos position. But yeah, it's just that H moment, that moment for truth, that's when it's time to speak. So it doesn't matter how high in agreeableness you are, because I think that Jonathan Pageau is high in agreeableness too. He has all that warmth. The H factor should kick in and say that it's not charitable. Charity's a word that's been corrupted. It doesn't mean nice. It doesn't mean be nice to everybody. and like mercy doesn't mean letting everybody off with, you know, letting everyone away with everything, whatever they're doing. That is not, but it's been turned into that, you know, it's been turned into this sort of weak stuff. So I think it's not good to leave anyone with like false beliefs when the consequences are high. And this is that moment. This is that moment when the H factor, which Peterson's never mentioned, because it would have lost like a huge amount of his waffle, to be honest, about always speak the truth.
I think what you just said, I could go on and on about it. I think it's so significant, but at those moments, and I think that's the essence of the Christian experience, you know, when you think of the humility of Christ. Peterson's logos, I don't believe, is transcendent. He can say all those fancy words, but it's transcendent, and yet it's the person of Christ at the same time, and hold them together, because he has to turn Christ into a symbol. And the humility of Christ is a warrior spirit that can do that. The God of all things that can put himself in that position to be crucified it's all other virtues into one. And it's like you say, of charity or grace, we just turn it into a doormat. We see it in a natural lens. And at those moments when you really have to stand for Christ, it's such a big thing, what you just said, the H factor. It's huge. And in a world where we've all been socially engineered to be variations of different narcissists, you know, like you said, when you're married, if you can find somebody that can do the simple art of just, this is all the other person wants you to do. I see why when I did that, it made you feel like that. There's so many people that can't do that in this world, but they can rail on everybody else. Okay, we're getting off a little bit. That was me. That's my bad. Okay, so this is, like you said, this is the brother. And like you said, he's a recluse. I'd never heard of him before. I didn't know he had a brother. Mathematical.
So he's where, if you're paying attention to what there's, among some circles, they call it this little corner of the internet, TLC. There's a whole bunch of people in that, paying attention to philosophers, cognitive scientists, are having discussions about consciousness and how does reality work, etc., etc. And if you're paying attention to any of them, they're all paying attention to Jonathan's brother Matthew, who was the groundbreaker on the symbolic thinking, and who's in, literally, as you can see in the background there, in the woods. He doesn't give many interviews, and he genuinely is a super deep thinker. He wrote a book called The Language of Creation, and it was about the book of Genesis, about the symbolism in the book of Genesis. And there's amazing stuff in there. So is the quality of the thinking and the structuring and all the rest of it. What is missing is everything we talked about in our last discussion, the true typology that makes it all stand, that brings everything together.
Right.
It doesn't have that, but he does have the capacity to go into the story and into narrative and into, you know, how things lay themselves out. One of the lines that Jonathan always says is that reality lays itself out symbolically, and that's partly true. He repeats it again and again. Reality lays itself out symbolically. That's why you can see patterns. That's why you can see narratives. But the reality is it's that the symbols lay themselves out typologically. So the fullness of reality, which is the person of Christ. So
that's I guess that's the end point of the In Pursuit of the Metaverse, or Seeing Through the Singularity, is that it's a substitute for the person of Christ. You said it beautifully and simply right there when you said that. Now, is this first clip something about our Blessed Mother?
Oh, is this the first? This is where he says, I'm not going to talk about Mary. Yeah. This is such an interesting. It's not so much this clip, although his reaction is telling. But
okay, so we're already 45 minutes into it, and I honestly I haven't heard it, so I don't know what the setup is. I guess they're talking about symbolism in the Bible, and so he's probably okay.
I can tell you, he was talking about. Well, the title is The Language of Renewal, and he's very much talking. his latest sort of tack is going into sleep and dreams, and he's kind of interpreting everything in terms of sleep, dreams, and renewal, and either the completion, the fulfillment of the renewal, or the failure to renew. And he's reading this in kind of and digging into myth and story. But for him, it's, well, I guess you'll see, he's asked, because he's talking about the feminine, so much about the feminine. It's all about the feminine, actually, in what he's discussing. He's asked, I don't know if it'll show up from this particular clip, but how would he speak about Mary in terms of her role with regard to the feminine? And he says, I'm not going to talk about Mary.
Okay, here we go. Oops.
So I used to, when I saw this in dreams, I used to think it was totally random, when I saw his dreams, like, oh, airport. That's such a boring dream too, it's like, why, what is this dream about airports?
It's 45.
But now, after looking.
Okay, hold on.
Did you get it? 45, 40, 55?
Okay, I got to get up here a little bit. My bad.
A bit about Mary as relates to like the role of the feminine.
I'm not going to talk about Mary.
Okay.
I don't talk about Christianity. And it's not because I'm not a Christian or because I don't like Christianity. It's actually the opposite. Christianity is the highest level of it, okay? And I think we've lost the ancient worldview. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. We've lost it, okay? And it's many reasons for it, why we lost it. I mean, I don't necessarily want to go into it, but it's usually about we tried to integrate certain things that we couldn't or that we shouldn't have, such as materialism. But there's other things that we tried to integrate, thinking that we could.
Yeah, you can go on to the next later, because what happens after that? He does spell it a wee bit out and says it's all back to the Old Testament. It's all got to be back to Eve, not to Mary, but back to Eve. And the mystery, Judaism basically embodies the mystery of, and then what he's trying to do is integrate Christianity into that, integrate Christ into that. So Judaism, and you'll see he comes back at, I forget what I said, but we can go straight to 203:40.
What about 201? Let's go there. 201 ET.
Basically, is just him coming back in, and well, I guess you can go there. Yeah.
2. Okay, sorry about this, everybody. Here we go. 201, 18, a little bit.
Yeah, so it just happened like that. So,
well, I'm thankful for whoever's in charge of lucky emails.
Of lucky emails, yeah.
Okay,
all
cool.
Right.
Good talking to you.
Yeah, it was fun.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
So, Matthew, just wanted to address and clarify one thing that was brought up in the interview. So I'm just going to ask him a question. Why don't you talk about Christianity in general?
Okay, so the reason I don't talk about Christianity is actually pretty simple, but so not everyone's going to agree with me, on that issue. But people don't have to agree with me. That's the thing, I don't have any. I don't have any position of any authority, so I'm nobody. So you could disagree with me and then just ignore me. That's the reality of it. So it shouldn't be a big deal that I voluntarily don't talk about Christianity. But I think I do need to explain why, because it can be interpreted in ways that are not, that are not what it is. So it's not out of disrespect, it's not because I don't think Christianity is true. It's actually the opposite. Okay, so why? Because I think Jesus is the incarnation or the embodiment of the highest truth, okay, that our that we can grasp. Okay. It's like, as it says, it's the keystone. So it's the pinnacle stone, or even the keystone might even be a better symbol for it. So the problem is, so let's use another analogy than the keystone, although it's correct, but just so I can explain something without it becoming too strange. But it's like we have a lock and a key. So a puzzle, or an enigma, a riddle, and then the solution to the riddle, or the final, the way to unlock the riddle. Okay. To get past an obstacle, also, it's another way to see it, because the lock is an obstacle. So I think that Christ is the key to the lock of the universe. Okay. I don't know how else to say it. I think that's the best way. So there's a riddle, but the lock itself was also embodied. Just like the key is an embodiment of this principle, the lock is also it was embodied in the past, this lock, so as to represent or symbolize the entire mystery of the universe. It's not the actual mystery. It's an embodiment of that mystery, a symbol of that represents the whole mystery. So this lock, I think, after a while, we neglected the lock. So it's like, once you have the key, maybe you think the lock's not so important anymore, because we have the key now. Why do we need to bother about the lock, right?
Is that kind of the main idea?
He
A little bit further.
He'll revisit it. He'll revisit it
Okay.
kind of again and again. So that's why I kind of split it into a few sort of keys. So he will come back.
What I suspect is going on here, in Christian hermeneutics, all the types are embedded in the Old Testament, and then the New Testament reveals those types. In other words, he's saying that it's the key to those types. But what he seems to be doing here is, let's go back to the lock. He's saying, yes, that's what I believe. They're the key. And he's doing a subtle shifting here. And it seems like he's going to say, he's saying it without saying it, but we have to actually, the lock is more foundational.
Oh yeah.
So he's saying somehow you think that's the key, but then you come back and say that. How would you say it? What's he up to? Or should we do
he
nothing?
does. He's going to go on to say that we had the key, then we lost the lock. He will say that the key is a skeleton key that opens all locks. But so if it opens all locks, if Jesus is the key that opens all locks, then what you would do, of course, is have unlock the lock that you are. Accept Christ and be unlocked. Instead, it's a kind of Gnostic puzzle, and he goes to saying that the original lock wasn't like a simple thing. It was phenomenally complex. It's like a million different pins. It's not just a 2-pin lock. It's like a million pins. And this key is going to unlock the original, which is the laws. It's Judaism, and it's the Judaic laws is what he's talking about. He speaks very ambiguously. That's what when I was reviewing this, the ambiguity in the way that he's speaking is amazingly. I'm here. It's this, it's that. It could be this. It could be that. It's two things at once. We want the question. We don't want the answer. He literally says that at one point, because the key, the answer to the question. No, we want to get the question again. He goes into Douglas Adams. I don't know if you know Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but the idea of we've got the answer, but it doesn't make any sense now. We need to find out what the question was. So it's the quest for the ultimate question. And he said, you'll see a whole bunch of the bits I've said are the key bits where he'll say what.
I'm going to play a little bit more. What I sense and I deliberately didn't look at this too much because I wanted it to be fresh. But what I see here, I'm going to assume he's not. He's like, I'm going to take him at face value that he's just doing this, and this just seems like classic Gnostic thinking, And what it is from the first century on is that Gnostics want to unravel the mystery of the universe. And so in Christian theology, when you're in the metaverse, when you're in the metaxy, you're hanging together and like a surfer between the transcendent and the physical, the transcendent and the immanent frame. You're holding together this anthropology and this theology in the Christian tradition of a transcendent God that transcends all categories of thought because he is creator of everything, comes in and he assumes a body and he leaves a body. And that's part of, so holding together the spiritual and the body together, the Gnostic is going to try to untangle that in that anthropology and that theology. And this took centuries in order for us to get this in our creeds and get the nature of Christ right. This is foundational because once you get the nature, and that's what Gnostics always got, the nature of Christ right. He was the God man, all God, all man. If you don't get that right, you get into this kind of thinking where the smartest among us become the Gnostic adepts, and their goal is to bring people in because they're unraveling a mystery that nobody else can get. That's what it sounds like to me. But
he is saying unraveling a mystery that no one else can get. And
that's what Gnostics do, and they bring people into their schools of thought.
But the interesting thing about this mystery is it is the mystery of Judaism today. It's not just an abstract exercise. So, well, you'll see later on just how interesting it gets. So I would say go to 205:30. Why don't you talk about the key?
How about I got 210:59. Should we do a minute of that?
I
would say first do 205 if you can.
Okay.
It's just
205.
205.
Oh, I gotcha. I thought we did that one. 205. Okay.
30. No, we just started at the beginning. 205:30 if you can get.
Okay, let me try it right here.
Close enough.
We were able to unlock some of these questions with the key that we had, but at one point what happened is we neglected the original lock. Okay, so the lock that embodied the mystery of the universe, it was a representation of the mystery of the universe. And we kind of neglected that lock. And I think at one point we lost it. We lost the lock, not the key. We have the key. So,
oh my goodness.
So then it's like, why don't you talk about the key that we have? Because the key that we have is infinitely more full of light or full of meaning or full of authority. It solves every problem. So this key, without the lock, it gets taken for granted. That's what I'm saying. So
Do you want me to go a little bit more? Or do you got the idea right there?
I guess that's okay. Basically, it's
let me take him another 30 seconds and see what he's going to say.
Even though you have the key, if you don't have the lock, you don't realize what this key is capable of unlocking or answering as a riddle. You lost the riddle. It's like if we have an ancient riddle that we've been trying to solve for thousands of years, and then at one point comes a stage where we find the answer to the riddle. Okay, so that's good. Now we're all happy about that. But then later we kind of neglect the riddle and we have the answer. And then later, much later, we just have the answer and not the riddle anymore.
Yeah. I mean, he goes on like that for a bit, but you can see it's not what he's calling Christianity is conceptual. It's not the church. It's not the reality of.
He's left the bodies behind. It's such classic Gnosticism. He separated the body. This is what Descartes was doing, to bring on the modern age, separating the body and the spirit.
And it's the symbol of Christ, like you said. Christ is not a symbol, but it's the making of Christ into this symbolic thing, which will unlock. I'll do this mental operation on things, and that's got like zero to do. So what he's calling Christianity isn't Christianity. And I suppose what I should have said, I should really have set this up better. It was in my notes, I think, but
go for it.
This makes it so much more interesting in a way, that Matthew came out of his forest or at least onto Twitter, a while back. And he put out a bunch of interesting stuff. But he put out several times said that the reason he was going to have to like start speaking out was because his brother was taking all the credit for his life's work. So there'd been this rift between the two of them, which is it's kind of. And so the stuff that he talks about in the body, if anyone does go back and listen, about Cain and Abel, he talks a lot about Cain and Abel himself in that. None of it actually fits for someone who's an expert and all the rest. He's not actually, to me, it's very clear he's not talking about Cain and Abel. The things he attributes to both and to the roles and to what they're about. One's a spare, one's to be used, one's a spare. One's for the heavy sort of grunt work, the other's for the fine, subtle stuff. He's talking about himself and Jonathan, and he's annoyed that Jonathan has taken his ideas essentially and run with them in this successful, ever more successful symbolic world, explicitly Christian Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox context. And so he was speaking up and in some annoyance about that. So yeah, the Cain and Abel stuff, it has nothing to do with Cain and Abel. Everything he's saying is Jonathan and him.
Yeah, and I just have a little bit. Yeah, that is interesting. I never knew all this stuff, and what I do find him doing, and this is what the early Gnostics did. Christianity is a revealed tradition, and that's what it is. And we have these mysteries. We have the mystery of faith, we have the mystery of iniquity, and we hold ourselves in the metaxy, and we're comfortable in that mystery. And that's why we don't have to try to solve everything. The Gnostic mind is not happy with that. And that's the nature of the Gnostic mind. They don't truly look inside just to say, it's that simple. I'm in a fallen world. My redemption back to the Christian singularity is that I have to do my interior work to get right. Instead, the world is broken. There's a puzzle out there and I have to solve it. And so they're projecting their absence, which is it when you talked about the type of humility, it's a type of narcissism. I'm literally pathologically incapable of going here, but I'm going to use my mind, my mathematical genius to try to put together the cosmic riddle. And many people will follow this babble.
Well, I think it's more that he's influential to certain circles rather than this isn't going to have massive, what he's saying isn't going to have massive appeal, but this is an influential guy actually, and a proper hermit mystic, deeply ruminating on all these. So
yeah, I'm finding this very interesting. I mean, these are the.
Oh yeah, I know what I was going to say.
Go ahead.
If you're going to use key and lock as the symbols with Christ, it's the lock is your heart, like the locked, shut out thing.
Yeah.
And the acceptance is Christ comes in and he's real. And the symbols are just symbols. They're just words like wolves and sheep. But you're going to use, they should speak and they should speak to the reality. Whereas what he's talking about is
Christ created us as, part of this anthropology is so significant. The way we talk about the Trinity, we are the image of God. We're his bearers or representatives on earth. And the Trinity are three persons. It's a personal relationship. And he's abstracted that, because that's another thing, the modern world, he's abstracted that, and it's not real. The Christianity that he has is a simulacrum that he's working from, in my opinion, from the little bit I've seen. That's just the pattern I see.
It'll get more interesting.
Okay, let's do it.
So the next one, I'd say go to 210.
What I'm doing is I'm looking for the lock,
210,
the
39.
original lock, not the lock that was
39.
cared about.
Oh, I got 210, 59.
210, 39, I think it is.
Oh, maybe I went just a little bit past. Okay, right here.
Why, to me, debates are kind of useless, because usually a debate is somebody throwing stones at you, stumbling stones at you, but not willing to listen to the answer, or not willing to do the effort that it takes to understand the answer, So that's what I want to avoid. So what I'm doing is I'm looking for the lock, the original lock, not the lock that was cared about later, the original lock, the original riddle. Okay. And because it's lost, I think, truly lost.
A little bit more, is that enough?
A little bit more, a little bit more.
Okay.
And this riddle, that's why a lot of what I say sounds a lot like Judaism. It does sound a lot like Judaism. I've been told that, and it's true. But it's not because I'm trying to subvert Christianity or anything like that. It's the opposite. I'm looking for the lock, and the lock was written in the language of Judaism. It was written in that language. The Bible is the lock, okay? The Bible is the riddle that was supposed to be solved by the Messiah. And like I said, I think Jesus did solve the riddle, okay? But like I said, I'm just repeating myself here, but the lock has been lost. So we don't know the value of this key anymore that we have.
I think we got that right.
Yeah.
Before I get to you, just my initial, this mindset is this evangelical Zio mindset that they've lost just the simple reading of reality, the simple reading of, Galatians and so forth. It lays out these typologies in Hagar, and they're looking to rabbis to tell them how to understand Christianity. They're literally, it's that absurd. They're looking, he said, I'm a Christian. We got the key, and this inverted thinking, but I want a rabbi to help me unlock the lock. And it's a rejection of Christ, but yet you're cloaked in this language of understanding Christianity. Anyway, go ahead, please. I want to hear what you say about it.
Well, the other thing I'll say about when he came out on X, Twitter, he then retreated because back into silence after effectively denouncing all the Christian churches, denouncing the Catholic Church, denouncing the Orthodox, and saying that it was just scandal and abuse. Because someone had said you need to be in the tradition, you need to be it needs to be real to make it real. And he poured scorn on that, and people were shocked because they thought because Jonathan is Eastern Orthodox. A lot of people thought, which Matthew's Orthodox, isn't he? He's Orthodox with the beard and everything. But he's not. He's not in any. I think they grew up evangelical. Jonathan converted to Orthodoxy. Matthew's never converted to anything, but he's gone deep down the as you say, going to rabbis. As he'll say that, I think at some point in the next. The next bit. Yeah, I would say put on the next bit.
And just a quick comment. It's this. I think Puritanism was, pretty much a Judaized and bastardized separation from the fullness of the faith. And it lends itself to this certain kind of thinking, because we said you've left the eternal form, thinking you're trying to capture everything else. But what I'm saying is that the type of thinking that it leads to in the modern evangelical world, and I get it, I was there. You see COVID, you see all your priests and your pastors sell you out, and you just say, look, I'm going to do the buffet Christianity. I'm going to pick my own hermeneutic. I'm going to pick my own theology. I'm going to pick my own eschatology and create my own thing and have my own internet friends in church. And that if you read the Bible, do not forsake the assembly. And the reason is that makes no sense. You don't need to get there and go for a Protestant idea of having the pastor whip up your emotions. Or whip your spirituality up, because you don't want to negate, no matter how bad things get, you don't want to neglect the mystical body of Christ, the Eucharist. And Catholics kind of realized that during COVID. But yeah, that kind of thinking, when you're always trying to solve the riddle and you're given this, you don't want to submit to the authority of the church. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. Okay.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
100%. That's what it's about.
Okay.
The next one,
213.
213:35. Yeah, this
Okay.
will. This is pretty amazing. Have you lost it? Is it playing?
A little bit further.
Oh, no,
I'm sorry. I didn't have it on the screen.
Yeah. It wasn't playing. So
Was it all silent during that part? Okay.
yeah,
my
I
bad.
was listening inside thinking you were searching for it. It was a moment.
Oh, okay. Let me do it again, y'all. Sorry about that.
To 213:35. Just back another
230, 35.
35. Yeah.
So this key unlocks the whole big lock. Okay, so the reason I don't talk about Christianity is not out of disrespect, but the opposite, out of respect, because I'm someone who's looking for that lock. So as long as I'm not able to formulate what this lock looks like, or I can't show it clearly, it's useless for me to talk about the key. That's me. I don't suggest anyone follow in my footsteps. I'm not trying to be a leader or anything like that. I'm doing something that I think needs to be done, because soon I think we're going to be faced with people that are maybe our enemy, and they do have that lock, and they're going to show it in an adversarial way to us, and we won't be able to answer because we don't know how to use the key anymore, because we've been not using it with that lock. But so what I'm trying to do, I think
That's enough.
It. Well,
Okay.
yeah, because I don't know if you heard what he said there. Soon.
Do a breakdown. What's he doing? What's he saying?
He's saying soon we're going to be confronted. So this lock is completely lost from what he said. But now
To Christians or to everybody?
Well, that's a good question, because now he's saying clearly not to everybody, because now he's saying that we're going to be confronted with people who are the owners of lock, enemies who are the owner of the lock, who are going to be presenting it to us in an adversarial way, and we won't be able to answer them. That's an amazing thing to say.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's what I heard. It was pretty wild.
Yeah, I mean, he believes the owners of the lock, which is the synagogue,
Yes.
are going to be
adversarial.
Yeah, coming to us as enemies, presenting.
And we don't know. We don't even know how to fight them on spiritual terms. Is maybe one way to kind of think it.
And yeah. I mean, it would be nice. It would be nice if it's Matthew who's going to save us from the synagogue. It would be nice if that's what he was saying. But well, we'll see. I mean, he doesn't appear to say that as he goes on. Like if I do this thing, I'll be able to appease them by showing my understanding of the law. What it sounds like is Noahide.
Yes. That's what I was thinking.
So I didn't. I skipped a bunch in terms of things because I didn't want to take up a giant amount of time. He talks about Christianity versus the old lock. He says it's not our fault that we lost it, because it wasn't for us. It was for the Jews. The law was for the Jews, because when he says lock, he means law. And the law, this was all for the Jews. So why would we worry about it? It wasn't our problem.
Right.
He says about Paul, he's not entirely complimentary about Paul. He says Paul comes. I mean, Paul does say himself he's a fool for Christ, but he says, should the Jews have become fools? Should they all have just become fools? Because Paul was coming and telling them to break laws which they'd been told, if anyone comes and tells you to break the kosher law, you have to reject them. And so they came and they told them to do it. So they were right to reject. So that's why he's not actually saying there's a mysterious group out there that I have no connection with who are going to come, and I need to be prepared on everyone's behalf as Christians so that I can present them with this key, which we already have, or so that I can present them with my understanding of the lock. He's actually saying effectively dual dispensation, that the Jews were right to reject Paul. So it's a rejection of Paul and therefore a rejection of Peter, because you reject Pauline Christianity, you're rejecting Petrine Christianity, because Peter had the dream, Peter's say, and opened it up, and it changed everything, but it fits with what Christ said would happen, that it would pass to another nation. The kingdom of God would be taken from the Jews and would be handed to another nation. So everything that happened fitted what Christ said was going to happen, but he still went in full and presented in full to the Jews, to the Pharisees, to the people. And primarily, that was his thing. So it was done. And Matthew recognizes the symbolism of the Cain and Abel story much better than Ben Shapiro. He knows what it's talking about. You'll see that in a bit. But I just wanted to say, the law was not for us. So we didn't need to worry. So that's why we neglected it and lost it. And we used the key for a lock later on. We used it for another lock. But this is the real quest. Yeah.
It seems like there's the enmity between the two seeds. This is the fundamental story in redemption history. And Christ at Calvary, and I think Paul says it this way, St. Paul, that he bore the enmity in his body, in his flesh, and he overcame that enmity. And so through Christ, we overcome that enmity. However, on the other side of the cross, there's still an enemy, and he recognizes this as an enemy. So he seems to, the word enemy seems to me identifies an enmity. And so Christ fulfilled the law, he transcended the law and transcended the enmity in his flesh, but yet Antichrist still wars against Christ.
Yeah, exactly. And he even seems to allude to an understanding if that's what's at work, but we'll see.
229.
Yeah, 229. Okay, go with this bit.
Okay, let me see.
How can Jews be Christian? See, that's another issue, because they did receive those laws. So do they all become fools like Paul? I don't think so. Maybe that Paul had a specific role to play. Clearly he did. He became the apostle of the nations. So he tailored his vision, to the nations. So it's a big problem. We're faced with a big problem. Not we. See, that's the thing. Well, this is what happened to me at one point. I asked myself about Jews, why aren't they Christian? That's what question I asked myself a long time ago. And unfortunately for me, I'm meticulous, I don't accept answers that cover something just to cover it, I need the real answer. So I learned Hebrew, did all these things, learned all these things. I'm still learning, I decided to talk to Jews at one point, what do they have to say about it? No, I discovered a lot of things about the problem. Some of them are dealing with this problem in slow motion. So that's what I'm doing. I think what I'm doing is also is a benefit to Christians for the reason I said before, because we need to see the riddle before it's presented to us in a adversarial manner.
Is that it? Did I get it?
Yeah, basically. So he knows something's going to be presented to us in an adversarial manner.
He sees the agenda. He sees a typology laying out. Does he see typology?
I don't know that he doesn't see in terms of Catholic typology, because he rejects, didn't mark it as one to go, but he calls Christian typology superficial and
That's so Gnostic.
He's talking about prefiguration. How is Samson's a type of Christ? How is he? Because he died. Yeah, he rejects the idea of prefiguration. I think it's because he's of whoever. This is speculation, but it's whoever he's been talking to when he says, he's talked to people.
Yeah, little birdie's been influencing him. It's interesting because what was created in the first century was another religion, right? And the other religion is created after the temple's destroyed. The other religion accepts a reality. The incarnation is a reality that they understand that they've rejected. And the reason is what was created is a religion based on a rejection of Christ. Literally, that's the foundation of it. And that seems to be exactly what he's saying right here. So
it's
to be Jewish, you have to understand the key to understand how you are standing in opposition, because that is the nature of your agenda and will form your telos.
Yeah, but well, they want to be able to do the reconciliation so that they can come out on top. So they come out from under the curse, because it's the curse is there. And in this next bit, Matthew understands it. This one is like, if you go for about 2.5 minutes on this one,
2:33.
2:33. This is I think illuminating.
Sometimes, but I don't think anyone should follow me, into the pit. But I'm not trying to be a leader or anything like that. I'm doing something very specific. But now I'm explaining what it is so people know. I'm trying to find the lock. This lock, by the way, is the Grail. Hey, this is the Grail. It's the question. The original question.
I'm just interrupting. That's the egregore of the classical alchemical, like looking for the Holy Grail. That is the mindset, the egregore that he's fallen himself into. And instead of just relaxing and it just like St. Augustine would say, our souls are never settled until they're settled with Christ. And just looking for that magic key. And it's just, okay, never mind. Let me keep going here.
That killed Jesus. And the blood flowed into that question. But
the question killed Jesus.
What we want now is not for that question to kill Jesus again. Why do that? Well, when I say kill Jesus in this context, I mean attack Christianity. So it already happened once in the past that Jesus was attacked, the Messiah was attacked by these questions. There's no reason to do that again. It's not, we kind of lost the Grail at one point, but we don't need to use that occasion to attack Christianity against. A lot of people are doing it. I'm not want to add myself to everyone who's attacking Christianity right now, which is like everyone, So I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing. I hope it makes sense what I'm saying. It doesn't sound completely insane. It's not. So I'm gonna keep working what I'm working. There's things that I have to explain. So now I'm trying to explain the Grail, which is sleep, which is rest, renewal, the stone that was rejected by the builders, the stone that Moses hit with his staff. God says, ask the stone for water. Moses is impatient. He hits the stone with his staff and he still gets water, but it's not in a good way. And because of it, he's refused to go into the promised land. So you got to be careful with that stuff, You don't hit the stone that renews you. You don't hit it. Especially when God says what to do, which is ask the stone for water. If you don't need water, you don't have to ask the stone for water. If you do, you ask. but you don't hit it. So this is what happened to Jesus, He was hit with the staff of Moses, and he still renewed, still did it the job that the stone does, but not in a good way, in a negative way. It's the same thing with Cain and Abel. Abel was supposed to renew things for Cain, but Cain decided instead to hit him with his lance, his weapon, and he bled out, and his blood renewed the land still. Well, see, that's the thing. It happens still. Jesus still renewed, but in a negative way that leads to some tribulations and some exile for the people who did hit him. So
that's I don't know how much you got of that, but I mean, he then shows that he really does understand the symbolism that's at work here, the typology of Moses hitting the rock, and when he was told to ask the rock for water, he hits the rock and the water still comes out, but the consequence is Moses is not able to enter the promised land. And then even more clearly, the staff of Moses hitting and saying it's hitting Christ. The staff of Moses hit Christ. Cain killed Abel, and it's still the blood. The renewal still happened. He said the blood still flowed out, and he says, and that's not a true part. The thing he says is wrong, because he says that Abel's blood still renewed the land. The land is cursed by Abel's blood. It's not a renewal that happens. The land is cursed. So he's saying exile for some people, it's like a curse. It wasn't good what happened. So Christ's blood flowed out. It wasn't good. It wasn't in a good way. It's not good for who? Not good for who?
I get it.
Not good for the people who are in the receiving end of the curse. Not good for the people who are wielding the staff of Moses. Not good for the people who were in the role of Cain. He spells out all of that in that short passage, which is kind of mind-blowing because he's saying where he's coming from. I don't think he meant to reveal his whole hand with this. I think you reckon he did?
No, I'm agreeing with you. I think he revealed, so I started talking to them, and obviously he's got in syncopatico, and like you say, he's talking in this a little something over here, a little something over here. Yeah. But I don't want to be a leader, but yet I am a leader. This kind of thing. Obviously, you crawled out from a rock to influence I don't want people to look at me or take me, go down to the pit with me, but yet I need to somehow redeem humanity. And
it's a messianic mission that he's on. It's a major. This is no small mission.
I think he got tuned into these energies.
Yeah. No, I would agree. Actually,
I think I think he's using his brain. He got part of this messianic complex.
Yeah, and his body language, his demeanor, his whole thing. It's like he's transmogrifying before our eyes. He and his brother used to look quite similar. I don't think they do.
Oh, you mean like when you say his body language?
Body language. I think he's taking on some stereotypical kind of. Perhaps that's just to my eye. But
no, I get it. I know what you're saying. He looks like he's he could just seamlessly blend in with the tribe there.
Yeah. So the last one is the 241.50, going up for a little bit, because this is the occultism and the moneylenders analogy. This is just towards the
his
end.
Weapon, and he bled out, and his blood renewed the land still. Well, see, that's the thing. It happens still. Jesus still renewed.
I need to go further. 41.
Yeah, 241. Yeah, 241.50.
Not that weird. I think I'm doing normal things. I think other people are not doing the right thing, actually. Sometimes some people who occultists are an example of that. They talk about things that they know when it's not time. Why? I don't know. Because whatever reason, it doesn't matter what the reason is, really. I shouldn't even need to think about that. But some occultists have more knowledge than some Christians. Okay. But that doesn't mean it's better. It's like buying something on credit. You know, you borrow money. I borrow money to buy this big mansion, let's say. Okay. $1 million mansion. I borrow all the money and I buy this $1 million mansion. Am I better than the guy who owns a little house there? You know, $100,000 house, you know, in a rural area. Am I better than him because I have a gigantic mansion? No, because I borrowed for it. It's worthless. It's worse than nothing. It'd be better if you had nothing than this house that you borrowed with millions of dollars, you know. It's not really yours. So occultism is like that, you know. It's like you have a power that is not yours, that was lent to you by an entity that you don't really know. This is what happens when you borrow money too. This money or this power is being able to be used by you, but you don't know all the implications because, like I said in our previous discussion, the one who lent you the money owns your soul right now. He owns your identity, your soul. So you might think you're using this power that looks like it's more, you know, the guy who bought a $100,000 house with his own money owns more than me that borrowed all this money to buy the mansion. So this is how you understand some of the occultism. You know, the occultism is like the guy who borrowed $10 million and bought a mansion. And it looks like he sometimes has more than the other one, but he has much, much less. In fact, he has millions of dollars of debt, which is worse than, it's worse than having nothing, actually. A beggar is better than this guy, you know? So it's just an example of things happen in their time, you know. Maybe the guy can get the mansion, but in its time. He's trying to get it before it's time. He has to borrow money from an unknown entity that might be adversarial to him. And the moment there's a problem, he gets crushed by this entity, you know, this lender of power, this lender. So I think that's an important lesson to learn here. So everything in its time. God is someone who works slowly, you know.
That's yeah, I don't know if that was clear as well, but his analogy starts with occultism and he ends with essentially what is happening in the West right now, which is adversarial destruction through debt. You know, having gone into debt, the usurious, you've got a lender who owns your soul, who owns your identity, and who will crush you as soon as there's the slightest thing. So he spells all that out. Now, I don't know, is he oblivious? Is it sarcasm? You know, does he not know what he just said and how it fits with everything he has been saying? To me, again, it's like this is from proximity to people who've been talking to him about methods of warfare against people who are not your people.
Yeah. This is what we're
black magic or occultism, as in you got this power, it's not yours, you borrowed it. It's just,
I can see he's playing both sides, but yeah, in a meta narrative, and this is what we're talking about over on Locals. We're doing a 14-part series between Singularity and Noahide, but we're also doing a weekly series really just digging into the Jesuit article from 1890 called Christian Civilization. We're going through it paragraph by paragraph, and that's the claim, right? You know, through the birth of the Anglo-American Empire was this trade-off between these forces. You know, you say things work in threes, these unholy trinity of usury, idolatry, and sodomy. But the critical vehicle for this usurpation of Western power and the usurpation of Christ, that's replacing Christ with Antichrist. It's a slow process. He said God works slowly. So does Antichrist. And it's done through, he said, in meta-narrative, the West lost its soul. When the church banned usury, it kind of kept the whole model in place of all souls being in the Christian singularity, all forces, all regimes were moving every soul to heaven. The beginning of that breakdown, starting with the Protestant Revolution, was this force of opening these worldly powers. You can become an empire, but you're doing it You might think you have the upper hand against over the money lenders, but you're fooling yourself, because look at the history of the world. It's never happened. They always end up with the upper hand, and they own you spiritually. They will redefine. And that's what I said in Pursuit of the Metaverse. You had to accept their hermeneutic of reality, their lock. And then you had to try to jam, your key into their lock, and slowly you're moving into defining their reality. Now, I'll let you the questions you're asking, like, what is he doing? Is he being tongue-in-cheek? Does he not know this? Is he switching back and forth? He's working for the synagogue. He's trying to warn you. Does he even know what he's doing? But he's putting out some intriguing ideas. If you take them all together, I'll let you pick up the pieces, because he begins talking about the assault, and then he's telling you at some level,
He's telling
we're
you there's
going to be under attack here. We don't understand what I would say. We don't understand how their law works, what their teleos is, their agenda. We are on la land because they have zapped our soul, our reason, and with our soul comes our capacity for resistance against this force.
But he's actually said that's not happening. We're not. The staff of Moses isn't going to strike Christianity. Everyone's attacking Christianity. He said he's not doing that. But this adversarial group are coming to do that. I assume. I mean, if they're adversarial and they're enemies, they're coming to strike. I would have said it's already happening. It's already happening. So, I mean, whenever he says Christianity, he is talking in the abstract. He's not talking about the reality of sanctifying grace. He's not talking about the sacraments. He's not talking about, none of that had any, because he cuts it off. Paul came and preached a message the Jews were right to reject. Peter, backed him up, and everything changed. And so they were right to reject it. And it was a disaster, it's a disaster.
Christ says, this is why Christ says, you have to enter the kingdom of heaven like a child. And you have to just get the simple pieces right. And again, with the beginning of the book of Romans, they knew God, but in becoming wise, they became fools. And he is so Jordan Peterson, and I'm a Christian. And then then you sort of just dig if you're going to ask him a question. And this isn't Christianity, because he rejects the basic tenets of Christianity. And he's using, for his own Gnostic mind, all these, he's living in a simulacrum of his own. He's redefining all the typologies just to suit this puzzle that he's chasing. And ultimately it's this classic Gnostic text where he's chasing the Rosetta Stone. And like the medieval alchemist, it's really a journey. It's a fool's journey. And he calls Paul the fool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the personal aspect of it for his quest, but I think he's reflecting the people he's been associating with, their quest to reverse engineer the reality of Christian salvation, to reverse engineer it so that they can come out from underneath the curse that fell upon them, because he's recognizing the typology of that having happened and why it happened, to reverse engineer it so they can come out from under the curse and come out on top. Because that's always the dynamic, is no matter how low, find out a way to come out on top. And so I think this is the sort of high-end, sort of Kabbalizing, taking Christianity into Judaism, like Judaism reabsorbing and saying, no, this.
And that's what his brother's doing in that conversation with Shapiro. They're doing the same thing. They're doing their bidding, whether advertently or inadvertently. And yeah, I mean, I'm redoing, the Singularity book, and that is the thesis of the Singularity. That's what's going on is a reverse engineering of the Logos. And he called that, in some sense, like the Logos or the law as it is, in the Greek mind. And that's, when Christ comes to Mars Hill, and he kind of picks that, and he unlocks it through his person, right? Or St. Paul does it through the person of Christ. So yeah, what would you make of all? How would you pull all this stuff together?
Well, the Christian salvation is like you said, incredibly simple to the point where it is childlike. It is accept Christ, become a member of his body and all that entails, his body on earth, and live in grace. It's that's it. That's it. It's not. There's nothing actually to work out. It's only to accept. It's only to actually do.
But at some level, his ideas have influenced his brother. His brother is influencing Jordan Peterson. Three together are somehow synchronizing this. They're trying to baptize Christianity to create it into the new world. And to the extent that we consent to these Gnostic Christian ideas, which are essentially like all the original Gnostics were Jewish. They didn't just go off and just practice their own thing. They knew something was going on that they had to conquer in. So all the early Gnostics, now, when I say all, I don't know if everyone, but people that have kind of looked at them, the leaders of these movements were mostly displaced Jews. And they've continued this. This is part of what's gone into. It's a repackaging of pagan ideas with the Babylonian influence that would kind of do the critiques of the Talmud, that would become the Zohar, that would become practical Kabbalah, that are working and striving to this. But they realize the project needs consent. They need to bring these minds into it. And so instead of Paul's foolish submission to Christ, they need Gentiles to foolishly submit to this narrative. And
I mean, yeah, I hear at best where he would go would be Messianic Judaism, which isn't what Christ. It's not the church that Christ established.
It's a perverted synchronization of it's a synchronization.
I mean, that's at best, and they've already done all their like typological work and all their recognition, and they're already there. So there's no big mission. That's why there's something else going on with Matthew, because if he was going to there, he would just go and join them. Well, he would convert and say this is the real Christianity, this one that Key and Locke. And,
who do you think? I mean, like again, he obviously influenced his brother. His brother influenced Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson's influenced everybody with this wacky kind of neo-Jungian jibber jabber. Who is the guy interviewing? Like what? He's chasing a Rosetta Stone. He has to unlock the lock. He has to kind of unravel the mystery. And there's an audience. Like, is it just because he has a platform and can play these intriguing things? Or people know that
he doesn't normally give interviews. So he does things on like I guess sort of a deep whim, like when the time is right, sort of feeling that okay, now I'm going to speak. And now I'm in a retreat, because he said that. He says right at the end, he sort of does a recap of that's why I don't speak about Mary and Christianity. And then, I probably won't do this again for a long time.
It's funny how he didn't want to. What struck you when you said that you wanted to originally cue it up to the comment about Mary that he didn't want to speak to it? What?
Oh, that was what hit me. That just hit me. Yeah. Like, I'm not going to talk about Mary. Well, then you're not going to talk about the reality of what happened. You're not going to talk about, if all of his talk of symbolism and feminine principle and renewal and everything, you're not going to talk about Mary. So to refuse, like in that way, to sort of, I know I'm not going to talk.
Yeah, because everything else falls apart because he's talking about the key, the lock, which is the law, and she is typologically, she is the tabernacle.
Yeah.
And she is the tabernacle that brought in the logos. And typologically, she's significant at the beginning and the end of this narrative. And so to kind of shift that ground or misplace that category or to ignore it is this, you're just doing all this. We can go back to the heliocentric worldview. You're just out in space.
Yeah, spinning. Yeah.
You're not grounded.
The refusal to talk about Mary is the it speaks. It tells you everything, because as soon as he does that, you're into the new, you're into the reality. As soon as you're talking about Mary and what happens with the feminine through her, as well as the whole, not just the feminine but the masculine too, and the relationship to God, and that sort of perfect perfect submission to God, that perfect.
It's a perfect submission. And like you're saying this, when you get to the, when somebody tries to hold these people down to what do you mean by Christianity, or hold a Jordan Peterson down, like, what do you mean about the Blessed Mother? He'd probably become all like Joseph Campbell, and there's all that, well, there's this Blessed Mother, this, it's an archetype of this.
Yeah,
And there's no, he's not, he doesn't connect with the when we say have a personal relationship, the essence of Christ, he hasn't assumed it. I would think the fruit of it is the H factor that you mentioned.
yeah. To dodge, to weave, to have all this ambiguity, to think that we're going to have to trawl through a whole lot of we've got to go back to Eve, we've got to find some secret in the garden with Eve.
What
Well,
the
what's
tree
that all about?
really means. What the
Yeah,
tree really-
I mean, he is always talking about the tree of good and bad, as he calls it, knowledge of good and bad. And he will give various examples. I mean, he even said that the bit that I didn't line up about Paul, and Paul being overcome, he was something too high, you know, when he was on his horse and he fell. That he had effectively taken something eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and that's just false. I mean, he did
It's
say
an inverted consciousness. He got Christ. Well, I don't want to say Christ consciousness because that sounds new age.
no,
but
he
the scales of his eyes glue out. He had that consciousness from grace.
exactly. I know, and that is also typologically what happens with Paul as the Jew who's persecuting the Christians. You know, as that, you know, what happens to him is so symbolic, because that's the move for, if the Jews are going to go, that's the way they have to go, is through Paul. And yet he turns it around to say Paul is the apostle to the nations. And yeah, he does go out to the nations, but he in himself represents the pure Jewish conversion, you know, and like bang, and being too bright a light. And so it all applies actually to the everything he said about Paul applies to the Judaic, to be overwhelmed, to fall, and then to rise again and to go in service of Christ to all nations. That is, you know, so typologically Paul is remarkable, and he mangles this, and I think he mangles it. I don't think he does it deliberately, but I think it's because he has no respect for Paul's role. He says he does, but I don't think he does.
Yeah, I just think like when I was an agnostic, I would have probably bought into the symbolism because I kind of had a certain cultural attraction to Christianity as long as it was palatable and all of this stuff. When I was converted through grace, you know, one of the biggest kind of things is like the creation story is real. That makes sense. That the evolution story, without grace, I just couldn't see it. It's obvious when you couldn't. But part of, I think, getting it is, no, Adam and Eve, just take it at face value. Jonah was eaten by a whale and he's in the belly of the whale. Take it at face value. Paul was struck down. The scales came off his eyes. He went into the third heaven for whatever, 3 days. He might have been in his body, out of the body. He was taught like how he got this wisdom, supernatural wisdom came back. And when you want to put all those in symbolism, you're really just deforming the entire Christian narrative. And that's essentially what Gnosticism does. It's a deformed notion of Christianity that you can peddle for people that don't want to have eyes to see, or just don't have the grace to eyes to see. And, you know, I guess the guy's smart. I'm sure he's smarter than I am. But I'm smart enough to know when I say like through the eyes of Christ that I'm just going to take the literal, like St. Augustine said, if the literal works, you use the literal, you know, the interpretation of scripture. And that's how you come in as a child. You just take the literal. Now, you can hold like you say, the bread of life. It can be spiritual and literal, but when you detach it, like the Protestants did, and say it's entirely symbolic, you have just devastated the mystical body of Christ.
Yeah, no, I think it's literal. I think he's literally a door. It's not a door like a door in my house, but it's a door. He is a door.
And
he is bread, and he is physically bread. You know, he is physically bread in the Eucharist. He is the bread of life, and it is that incredible thing by us consuming him instead of assimilating him into ourselves, we are assimilated into him. That's the bread of life. Whereas ordinary bread becomes part of us. But the bread
Yeah,
of
and I
life,
know that Jonathan Peugeot, when he was talking to Ben Shapiro there, he was, making these references of Jack and the Beanstalk, Jack and the Beanstalk, and he's like, and Jack is reaching up to get all these goodies, and he's going. It's kind of like, Adam and Eve reaching, and when Christ reversed the curse, because that's typologically what he's doing. Every curse that Adam cast upon the world, he's reversing it. And it begins by rejecting all the promises of the evil one. And that's why when we take the Eucharist, we don't reach for it unless you want to do it in the post-Vatican II way, it comes to us. And, and that, I think that's so much also about this Gnostic quest. You're always reaching.
yeah.
And even though Peugeot could recognize this in one sense when he's talking to Ben, at the same sense, frankly, if I had to bring all this together, these dudes are double-minded and unstable in all their ways.
Peugeot for me is the compromised one, because he knows better, whereas I think someone like Peterson, he doesn't know any better. He's doing his thing. And I also think Matthew there, that's not compromise, that's choice. He's choosing 100% to go the way he's going. Jonathan is, I think, compromised himself by his associations, and the associations are now so incredibly negative, because it's not just people. It's, as you say, networks. It's networks whose influence on the world is pernicious beyond belief. What's going on.
We've covered so much ground.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just Gaza and the slaughter and the war.
People can talk about all this when this is going on in the world. This reality, everybody retreats. They talk us, detach from this evil agenda. It's evil. Detach from it. That's not escaping. It's I'm articulating the evil that's going on in the world, and I don't want to be a part of it. But let me ask you this, as kind of trying to do a takeaway, if I can remember this. I'm going to concede with you. I think that's what's going on with the two brothers. I think one started, with a sincere quest and entered Orthodox Christianity, and I think it had value in sharing that. To a lot of people aren't going to be open to evangelical kind of Christianity, but when you present it in a certain way, it kind of opens it up for some people. So I think, that message speaks to a lot of people, and I can see where he's sincere and just maybe became compromised. With this brother right here, here's the question I have for you. You spending so much, and this is why I thoroughly enjoy these conversations. You being able to see this, most people couldn't pick this out, in the deep significance about how the world is being transitioned, whether intentionally or not, just by people being double-minded, being compromised, and not speaking up for truth when it's in your face because it's comfortable. Now, here's the question I have with Matthew here, because you spent so much time as a mystic. Sometimes he has that gaze where he's maybe kind of self-satisfied because, he's kind of smart and he's getting some attention and he came out of the woods. We have a certain joy when we see the fruits of the Spirit of somebody that has encountered Christ and is living in grace. There should be a certain kind of fruit that comes from that person that should be visible. But sometimes it's confusing. We don't know. A lot of people have charisms and we don't know where they're getting it. But Christ promises that from their fruits you will know them. At least St. Paul does, right? So when you see the brother right there, from what you've been through personally in your life, when you see him, trying to explain this journey he's on and trying to unravel the mystery and in quest of the Holy Grail that he wants to deliver for once and for all. And that's part of the Gnostic quest. They don't like the mysteries. They want to have, to the extent that John Calvin was a Gnostic in Eric Voegelin's mind, because he had to take all the mysteries and he had to put it together in some comprehensive package by stripping it from all its mystery. And that's where the essence, I think, lies. But here's the question with this Matthew guy in this Gnostic quest, in my opinion, his Gnostic quest, I see somewhat of a troubled man, and that's trouble, being trouble, that means you're trying to solve a puzzle and you're struggling, and that's going to become evident. Do you see him, when you look at the fruits of him, just from, you've been a mystic, you've been kind of halfway through working it out, and now you're a Catholic, you're incorporated into the mystical body of Christ. When you just read his body language, and you were doing that throughout, do you see him ultimately as being kind of a lost soul? And to the extent, I guess you've already said it, does he reflect somebody that just has the reassurance of the submission? Because that's ultimately what I don't see him. He doesn't submit to the authority of the scripture and tradition. So when you read his body language, knowing the life of a mystic and what they go through, what are some of your just overall impressions after watching this whole presentation and now watching it again and having us break it down?
I would say my experiences are quite different to his, or my way was very different to his. I think mine was much more barbaric, to be honest. Mine was just sort of sheer force of will. I'm gonna crash heaven using techniques. That was me. Whereas, I'd say for him it's something different. I mean, he's even used analogies of like ruminants. To ruminate is is akin to a ruminant, an animal like a cow standing on split hooves, so split, like divided feet, and ruminating. So it's ruminating in division,
like the Baphomet's but feet.
kind of that. I thought he didn't mean it, but I kind of heard it. This was a little while ago in one of his things. So I don't know. He doesn't submit.
He didn't have this internal. That's an interesting observation. Then he didn't seem to have this internal unity. He was still lost in that sense.
I think he is in that way. That Kabbalistic thing is the coincidence of opposites, and I think he definitely falls into that. Whereas in the Catholic typology, there's no coincidence. This thing is good and this one isn't. You're not saying, oh, but good and evil coexist in this mysterious unity. That's not the mystery.
That's sold to us in a soft sell with the yin yang.
I think he is following something, and I think he's now looks to me like a fellow traveler almost for what is happening. I didn't even actually say one of the strangest things. Maybe there's a note to finish on. One of the strangest things in the body of what he was saying, but not the explanation for why he doesn't talk about Christianity. He referred to, this was really odd, to the time since 2020 that we had been put to sleep collectively, because this thing is all about sleep and dreams. We've been collectively put to sleep and entered into a dreaming, which is true. But he said he used to be sure that this was being done by an enemy and that it was like nefarious. And now he's not so sure. He thinks there's a possibility that it might be being done for our own good.
Well, Scripture tells us that God allowed the deception. In fact, I think it said that God made it happen.
Well, in that sense, to be put through it, but perhaps you're right. Yeah,
he allowed them. I don't even think it said allowed them. They were, the great deception is because they did not love the truth. So God gave them a spirit of deception. It's not even allowed it. He gave it to them. And that's hard for us to understand.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it may be, I was hearing it as...
I didn't say that about him. I'm just reflecting on our time.
Yeah, no, what I was meaning is that when he's describing adversarial, he was talking about 2020 and, a lot of people being not allowed to leave their homes and all of the things that happened, that he had been sure, because he did a whole lot about kind of propaganda and censorship and things like that. These little, quite brilliant observations at the time when I was following him. And he changed his mind about whether all of that was being done by an enemy, like to do something bad to us, that it might be being done for our own good, which to me sounded like, and perhaps I am hearing it wrong, and perhaps he really was saying God is allowing it to happen for our good, like a chastisement, like I was hearing it as that maybe these people who are doing this aren't actually so bad. You know, maybe they're doing it.
Yeah, I heard a little bit of both. Like, I'm trying to warn you, but yet I'm kind of actually, it's your own problem if you don't see it. I kind of tried to warn you. And I think he's kind of maybe mentally in both worlds. Okay, it's hard to let you go. We can't do this forever. But it reminded me, we had our other video, and this video is actually called The Pull of Tikkun Olam, because he's realizing part of the lock is the law, and the law is what's being used, that is Talmudic law, to reshape the world. So if we kind of pull, and we're all pulled into it. And our other video we did, it was called The Two Singularities, and how we can kind of, if we're not on guard, we can kind of end up in the simulacrum, or the other singularity. The pull is there. And where am I going with this? Okay, so this is maybe off topic, and maybe it does pull everything together, but we live in a world where we become part of what we watch, we become part of what we listen to, we become part of what we meditate upon, because so much of what you said in the first one is like, what type do we resign ourselves to? You know, what do we give ourselves over to? And maybe this is kind of petty, or I don't know the spirit from which I'm asking this, but when we look after like the influence land, you know, I'm Catholic, traditionally minded, so I listen to, I mean, my books are kind of in that vein. So when you look at like the Catholic, maybe specifically the Catholic influencers that have popped up and become kind of, popular, they've become big, they become part of a discourse, and some people out of nowhere, and some people have degrees in theology, and there's different people out there. But what I've seen with a lot of them is, that if you're not questioning the mainstream narrative, and you're not even questioning the alternative narrative, you're kind of pulling people into the spectacle. And I've been mentioning that. Okay, so where am I just kind of going is laying this out as a question, because we began with Benny Shapiro. We talked about Peterson. We talked about the Peugeot brothers. And I see the higher the platform goes, the more you're just going to keep it up. And I think arguably your platform can become your idol. And I think a lot of times you give up the fullness of the truth, especially when it comes to discussing hard typologies. And I know the gatekeepers, and people aren't necessarily deliberately gatekeeping, but they don't want to introduce what I'm doing over here, and a few others, very few, but, just introducing the typology of the synagogue and how that's what's playing out. And this is all biblical. So they don't want to talk about it. And some of them in very overt terms, we don't want to go there. We're not going to go there. It's not good for business. So I guess I'm babbling here, but the question, like so many of them, and some do, the point pints with Aquinas will literally bring on a Joe Rogan, will literally bring on a Peterson, will literally bring on the Peugeots, and everybody else kind of wants to mimic that. And they really are going to be in the same position that Peugeot was, that you're going to be on. You want to make it to the real big time. I made it to the minors. Now I'm going to make it to the majors all the way. And you're going to become essentially in that situation where you're going to be owned. Someone's going to pitch that idea and they're going to reevaluate Christianity and feed it back to you. And you're on a public platform. I mean, don't you think so many, you've looked at the landscape of these influencers, and how many of them in that same situation as Peugeot there? Am I saying it right? Is it Peugeot?
I think it's Peugeot. But
Peugeot.
yeah.
How many people are going to essentially, because they have been consenting, they slowly concede a little bit along the way. How many people would be in that same position, and they're going to have that same, well, yeah, essentially you're right, kind of flip the topic a little bit. And then that becomes a little piece of reality and a little death of Christ along the way. Does that kind of question, do you know what I'm driving at, or can you work with that?
Yeah, well, no, I just can only agree 100% that if you're going to, I would say there are two types of voices that you can trust in the landscape, in this media landscape, or influencers, people speaking, and that includes yourself. You're in this landscape as Dr. Deep State, and I would say you're one of the voices of the two types that I can trust. The first type is people who expose the trap. They don't necessarily walk into the trap themselves, but they expose. There's a two-sided trap here. There's a push to get you worked up and angry. You have people in this country. You did a fantastic discussion with David about the attack on Europe, and I could have said so much about that. But there's people in jail for saying people need to get out onto the streets, because of what happened in Southport. It is to do with the mass immigration, the demographic change thing. There's a woman in jail for tweeting that, basically, or putting on Facebook. She didn't do anything other than say people need to get on the street. You have an influencer, Douglas Murray. I don't know if you know him. He's on the sort of what were they called? It's Peterson adjacent. It's IDW types speaking out about woke. But when this October 7th thing happened, he was donning flak jackets. He was in Israel. He was suddenly a war reporter. He was an action man. But he said people need to get onto the streets. There was this big push to get people to, you gotta go protest. And there's another guy, Tommy Robinson.
I know him.
Yeah. And he
Zio agent provocateur there in the crowd over there in England.
Well, leading a charge. So these are the people who I would say are like they're what they exhort is to charge the guns. Like the enemy's got guns. Just charge the guns. If there's enough people charging the guns, and that's one push. Work people up and get them to go for it. Because they're so angry or because they don't have anything left to lose. And the other side of the push is status quo, like cancel and destroy these terrible people. Look how terrible they are, to code them as so it's an optical game to drive people into a trap. And there's a couple of commentators who would spell out, don't fall into this trap. You're only going to play the role that they want you to play. And they are very careful with their language. You can tell by the way that they allude to things that they know what's going on. You can hear the understanding, but they don't say it. But I would still trust them because they're exposing the whole trap. And then you have people who, like yourself, will speak the whole truth, speak the full truth, attempting to the best of your ability, attempting to leave nothing out, and therefore no odd spirits, floating about, coming in, carrying you off somewhere or carrying everyone else off somewhere. You're standing on solid ground when you're doing that. Even though, you're inviting a sort of St. Stephen potentially situation. You're inviting because you're going to stand. But what you're not doing is charging the guns. You're just speaking the whole truth. You're not telling other people as well to just charge the guns. So those are the people, whereas everyone else is either nonsense, it's either that circulation thing. That's the spectacle. Just stuff. This is what's happening now. This is what's happening now. This is what's happening. It just keeps going. This is what's happening now.
Yeah, that would be great if you could talk about really stuff that the hard stuff that you penalize, but it's so selective about what you're,
So they're not going to break that. If their game is talk about what's happening now, they're not going to break into like eternal forms and types. They're not going to do that. They're not going to say let's actually understand where we stand and what's at stake here. And it's always going to be those people. It's always going to be your soul is at stake. Your soul is at stake, and that's why you don't want to compromise your soul. Don't do anything that will compromise your soul, with whether it's allowing these lies to pass, or whether it's something more like charging into being captured by an egregore and charging off, thinking that it's going to fix or reverse what's happening, because it's absolutely not. The influencer world is, you can tell if it's doing that, if it's going in a circle.
So in the very sense, it's been. And people go in with the best of intentions because they love Catholicism. They might love Christ, and then the next thing you know, you could end up kind of being captured because you've sold out a piece. Okay, so let's end here and kind of pull a lot of what we've talked about together. And I think you said so much when you opened up the other video, which was just, Christianity is pretty straightforward. You had to go all over the world mentally, physically, to get to the point where this is actually quite simple. So did I. In the times we're living in, when we seem to be on the precipice of some great chastisement, as just something's got to break, some event will probably trigger something else. As far as pulling these things together and just a word of advice on somebody that wants to stay on the Christian path. And if you even want to get into it, I know people do politics all over the world. I mean, one thing I just remind Americans of when they get into their spectacle is that what's going on in the world is going on everywhere. So, one character cannot fix immigration around the world, and so forth. I'll even ask it to, I'll even be more specific, because I think you're going to give good theological advice to the question. Just stay the course, walk in faith, walk in grace. Don't believe the hype. I was talking to my mother today, and so she went to the neighbor invited her to a church. It happened to be, this is probably way too much information here, but it happened to be a Missouri Synod Lutheran. So of all the Protestants, this is probably about as solid as you can get. And the advice was, it was supposed to be about the times we're living in and the advice. So it was a long session. My mother enjoyed it. The pastor's talking about, do we live in a democracy or republic, and just talking about what's going on. And ultimately the story was, don't vote for the person, vote for the policies. So essentially he's saying what all the priests and all the religious leaders are: vote for the lesser of two evils. So maybe all this will be over, in a month after the elections here in America. Not, it's not the elections of the whole world. It's an election here in America, but I do think the world is kind of looking on because it's kind of unique. So I guess, what would you say about this proposition that our religious leaders, including the Pope, is basically saying, choose given the idea that we can consent to some energies, and that's that we've been biopolitically and mimetically programmed, so we don't always see the control, the virus that we've gotten. What would you say to looking to the leaders of this world, the religious leaders of the world, and don't play that game, or they're all controlled, two wings of the same bird? No religious, for some reason, when you're religious, you can't say that. So they're all telling us to vote for the lesser of two evils, and the code language seems to be to vote for the neocons. Okay, I think you get the idea. What would you say to that proposition from the Pope and from all the Catholic talking heads, including the priests of the world? I happen to know a few that don't buy into it, so it's great. It's not everybody, but what do you do?
I would say they're not addressing reality. They're 100% addressing the spectacle. They're in it. They're bought in and saying, well, which of these two?
I tried to say that to my mother and explain that to her. She's going, well, like, not everybody can be as on the internet or do this. And I say, no, it's the evil's going on. No matter how much the world, it's evil. It's not like it's a little bit less. It's totally. I'll just give you one example. We can go through thousands, like Trump, just like the Bushes, advocating for war, I'm going to be on YouTube here, advocating to do the thing with the pharmaceuticals, knowing that you double down with all your investments and you're enriching yourself off it. That's so evil. And yes, but it always has to come back to the spectacle, which is, I'm stuck in the dialectic. It's not her, not crazy woman, not the socialists. So they're stuck in it. And and you answered the question, and the religious leaders, they can't get themselves out of it. And it speaks to a time of a great deception and look, I'm not saying I'm the elect, but it's almost everybody, right? The devil really wants to get professed Christians on his side. And he's going to use those techniques of the spectacle, because that's the Ouroboros. That's how he works. And he's been building this. So all the pieces in the world are locked and loaded and ready to go. And he needs Christians on board. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly what's happening. It's exactly what's happening.
And when you say this message, and thank you for the compliment that I'm trying to speak truth here, nobody's say, hey, I want to hear what you have to say. Zero. 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 Nobody wants to hear it. And whatever, I'm going to go forward, whatever. But, and I'm just saying I'm doing my best over here. I'm just saying nobody wants to hear that message. I shouldn't say nobody. I have people on local, and we're all here, and we're commiserating together, and in a sense celebrating together.
In the earlier video when we talked about the two singularities, and I talked about taking the gold pill first, like
Right.
don't consume the black pills, and the black pill is political. The gold pill is tradition. The gold pill is the beatific vision. The gold pill is the Christian singularity. Everything we talked about then, and that will allow you to handle the poisons in the black pill. And the pill is black because there's culture war, which is, you know, like so much of it is just this engineered thing to soak up everyone's energies. These conflicts about, can a man become a woman? Can a woman become a man? Things we should never have ever done. It absolutely fulfills Chesterton made that prophecy, you know, the one about the men will take up arms before long, about whether the grass is green or the sky is blue, and they will take up arms and go into battle over it. And that's what's happened now. So the culture war is nested in a larger political war, and the political war is nested in the spiritual war. And so what I say is the culture war is protect yourself from the evil, because there are definitely moral evils just everywhere. Protect yourself, protect your loved ones, and speak out and stand up against them when you can. And then the gold pill, just skip the politics to take the gold pill and tradition and walk that path, and then take the black pill, then recognize, no, at the moment there's nothing we can do about this. Is disintegration. This is the end of Christendom. You can't.
It's the beauty of the Catholic tradition is that we have a lot of voices saying that this whole modern democracy thing is from the devil. They used to say that, and everybody's just said, yeah, but we got to play the game. And somehow it became that message. But I like finishing up on the gold pill. You've been such an excellent guest. You always say things that just I don't hear other people saying. You always provoke my thinking. And the way that you've been so patient, I know that you said your voice was ready. I've took you through the ringers here. It's been a slog, but it's been a wonderful slog. This has been so fascinating. I just thank you for the material you pulled together, having us really think about, just slow down and think about the times that we're living in and the challenges. And, you know, at the end of the day, take the gold pill. Remember that we have to just clear our eyes so that we can enter and remain directed toward the kingdom of heaven and enter like children.
It's simple.
Yeah. So thank you, Aidan, so much. Blessings to your family, to your countrymen, and thank you for being on with us. It was a wonderful time.
God bless you, Dr. Hagen. Thank you so much for everything you do.
Thank you.